Let's do this. So I'm going to make another video here just to talk about the various things about the FRQs. So I'm going to go through the questions, I think, and just go through the answers. I know you've all done this question already, but just to see how I would have solved it, and I think it's going to be kind of useful for this. So I also use the scoring guide as much as I can. Now, I haven't scored these yet, but I will be doing that and putting that in PowerSchool pretty shortly. But I thought I'd just go through and answer them as best I can and show you how it might work. And that way we can go and see how we do. So here's the first one. So let's go through the first question here. The first one was, and switch it over here so you can see what I'm doing. Aha, okay. Now I'm going to hide my notepad here because I've already done these answers. Okay, that's better. Let's make a new one for each one. Okay, so new question. So what we've got here is the crossword, right? So the first question is about making a crossword where we have black and white squares on the board, and this is going to give us a, let me just switch over to Chrome here. Basically what we have here is, oh man, this is not easy to see. Move that there. Better. Okay. That's better. Okay, so we have black and white squares, and the goal of this is to, firstly, we have a class for squares where the square will either be black and it may have a number. Now the number will be possibly 0 if it's nothing, so if it doesn't have a number. Here it won't have a number, or if it's black it won't have a number, it will basically be 0. But other numbers will start here if there's a certain criteria for those. So it has a positive number if the square is white and it does not have a white square above it or to its left, or both. Right, so you see here there's no white square to the left, so therefore it gets a number. Here there is a white square to the left but not above. Whereas this one has to the left and above, so it doesn't get a number. Right. So there's a certain those rules will come back later when we're doing the when we're writing this out. Okay, so we can look through here. It's kind of storing this as a 2D array, as a regular 2D array, and the job of what our job is firstly, when you look through a question like this, is to go through and understand the classes and how it's structured. And each time you do this, you probably won't have to do really look that hard at it. Eventually you'll notice a pattern to these questions, and usually it's some class here, for example, square, and that class is then stored in an array. And these are pretty common questions. We get a class stored in an array, and it will basically just be about going through that array and then dealing with each object. And so that's what we've got here. We have the first question is we need to write a method which will be part of the second class, right? Which will basically say, do we need to label this question? Sorry, this square. The label being the number, right? And it's just returning a Boolean result. So the first thing is, if it's a black square, and we're given an array here of black squares, where this 2D array will correspond to our crossword. So basically, it's a true or false array. It says, is it black? Basically, black squares. So 0, 0 here, yes. And 0, 0, 3, yes, true. But these are false, right? So we are going to build our, we're going to get our result by checking the black squares first. And then we need to make sure if there's a white square next to or above. Yeah, because of the criteria here is that it needs a label if it's white, i.e. if it's not black, and if it doesn't have a white square above or to the left. Above or to the left. So you can probably guess that we're going to check the row. We have a row and a column that we're given, and we're going to use row -1 and column -1 to check. Right. So let's go to our notepad. I'm just going to use notepad for this. And bring it up. Right. So the first thing I'll do is I'll change language to Java so it looks better. And let me check here. Okay. So our method is the method here, private Boolean to be labeled int R, int C, Boolean black squares. Okay, so that's our basic method. First thing, we need to check black squares. Now our result is going to be a Boolean result, right? True or false. And it's basically, we're just checking conditions here. So there's one, I suppose the first thing we might do is say, if, now let's refer to remember we're looking at puzzle here, that's the actual array of the puzzle, and we're looking at a row and a column of this, which will correspond to the black squares, right? So if squares, if puzzle, row and column, right? And this will give us a square. However, it won't tell us, my bad. That's the puzzle. If black squares, right, for this row and column, and we don't need to really say equals true, because, well, it's kind of redundant. If true equals true, remember black squares is Boolean, so you don't really need it. I mean, you can have it, doesn't really matter. You could just say black squares RC. We'll give it true or false. If it's black, it'll be true. So if it's black, we can return false right there. Okay, that'll be done. Because remember that the criteria for a thing to be labeled is it has to be white. All right, else. So if it's not black, then we can check the conditions, okay? So if, now we don't need to refer to squares, we can just, we don't need to refer to the puzzle, we just go to black squares. So let's check the one to the left and the one above. Okay, I'll get to the edge cases later, because remember, you always want to check your edge cases. But let's just check black squares. If black squares are -1, so that's looking to the previous row, same column, previous row, so the square to the left. If the square to the left is, oh, sorry, this would be the square above, my bad, that's row. So we're doing in rows. So if the square above is black, then this is good, right? Or, remember that we can put this together with an or, if black squares, and let's do the same row now, and let's do the square to the left, so that change the column, -1, see, -1. So if either one of these is true, then we can give it a return false, return true, because it'll mean that it fits this condition up here, which is the label, right? If it does not have a white square above it, or does not have a white square to its left. So therefore, we can return true. Okay. Now, if neither one of these is true, then we return false. Okay. So that catches all cases, right? If this is true, do this one. If not true, then do this. If it's true, if this is true, then return false. So that catches all cases, except now edge cases. So let's look at the edge. What happens? I mean, in this one, it's fine. We can go left, but we can't go up, and we would get an out of bounds error on this. If r was 0, we would get an out of bounds error here. So before we check this condition, we need to make sure that we check the 0 cases. So if r is 0, and this can apply for, so you notice that like everything on the top row, it doesn't have anything above it, right? There's no white above it. And here, there's no white here either. So if r equals 0, or c equals 0, oops. Okay. Then we return true. That catches the edge, right? So that now we've covered that. Okay, I'll put this down on this slide. Right. So this without this check, we may lose a point, right? Because the edge case would get us. All right, and that's how it answered that question. Let's do the next one, which would be let's see, what's it asking to do? Write the constructor. Okay, so let's zoom in on this one. Write the constructor for crossword. Should initialize the crossword grid to the same dimensions as parameter black squares. Each element should be initialized with a reference to a square object with the appropriate color and number. Right? So we have to set up this and give it a right color and number. And so this is the job of the constructor, is to basically build the crossword. Okay, and we're going to obviously use this to be labeled one as well. So let's go ahead. We're going to assume that this works. Okay. And we're going to build this puzzle. Right? Now, importantly, even though our code, where is the code? Up here. Okay, so here, as you see, puzzle has been declared in Crossword, but it has not been initialized. So declaration means that it's said, okay, it's a variable, but we have not assigned any space to it. It doesn't essentially exist in memory right now. And so make sure we need to do this. So we're going to initialize this, and let's initialize this. Let's get the notepad back. Right, so what we're going to do is start with our constructor. Let's see, go down here. There we go. All the details are down there. So let's do it. Public. Small letter. Crossword. And we get the black squares again. Okay. All right. So we take this black squares, and we're going to use it to initialize our puzzle. So as you remember, we have already declared it, but we need to initialize it, right? So puzzle equals new int, and we're going to declare it with the same size as black squares. Okay, and then we're going to zero. Okay, so we've initialized it with the same size as black squares. Now we need to iterate through it and create objects which match the labels for this. Now we have to obviously go through and give them numbers, and we're going to start the counter. I guess we have a counter, so we start to need to make a int counter, and we're going to start at 1. As we go through the list, if it needs a label, we're going to add 1. Okay. Now, if it's a black square, then what do we need to give it? The number is positive. Hang on, let me go back to Chrome. Right. So the number is positive if the square is labeled, and 0 if the square is not labeled. Right. So if it's black or it's not a label, we give it a 0. Okay. So we're going to start at 1. Now let's make a for loop. We're going to use 2 for loops. So int r equals 0. Start at the beginning. R is less than length, and plus to be for int c equals 0. C is less than puzzle. Okay. All right. So we have our loops now to go through the array. Now we don't have squares for these things, so we need to make a new square, right, each time, and we're going to need to address it though. So we need to we won't define it there, we'll just define it here. So I'm going to make a square FRQ. Right. And let's use it here. So puzzle so SQ, let's start making a new one, equals new square. Now we need to know if it's black or not, and the number. Do we have this information yet? Not quite. So we need to first determine if it's black or not. So we can do this by referencing black squares, or just using our to be labeled. Okay. So let's go here and say if to be labeled, we can just use R and C and black squares. We can assume this is going to be correct. So if this is true, it needs to be labeled, and we can use our label. Okay. And we can use our new square. Now, well, okay, well, I'll just do it this way. This is fine, but it might be easier to do this slightly differently by, let me do this. Okay, it's fine. So, new square. So is it black? Okay, the problem is we want to put the result here is black. I don't want to call to be labeled again. So actually what I want to do is separate this out as the result, and I prefer to have my Boolean result, right? And I'd like to also have just the result. So instead of doing it separate, I'm going to have result equals to be labeled for this. Right. Separate the result from test. So don't need to do it multiple times. Okay, if result's true, then we'll do a new square. I'm going to use the result. So, is it black? No. So it's the opposite of result. Result's giving me if it's a label, right, a true or false. The opposite of the result is if it's black, right? 5 minutes. Okay, it's annoying. Thank you, College Board. So, okay, I'm putting the result in, and then if it needs to be labeled, I'm going to use my counter. And as I am going to increment my counter afterwards, I can do that. ++. So it'll increment it after we use it. So let's see if we get the result of it needs to be labeled. Right? So we add a label. But if not, we will declare it in a different way. So we will go here, square equals new square, and we will use, now this is, again, the result is false, so it'll be opposite of result, because it'll be true, it needs to be black. And we won't use a counter, we will use 0 to initialize. Okay, we're initializing differently. Okay, here we are, and let's check that everything's right. Okay, double check. Same dimensions of black squares. Yes. Yes. Okay. So labeled according to the rule. We are using it to be labeled. And this just avoids using this twice. Now, I kind of would prefer to have this code and this code not repeating. I don't particularly like to have repeating code like this. I would kind of prefer to have our label. So we have maybe an int counter and int label. And then we do our result, a label. Label goes here. So we remove this. Our label will equal counter plus plus. And then this one, x label equals 0. And then we just do it at the end, square. And then all we need to do is just put label there. And this is much neater code. Yes. Even get rid of the brackets, don't even need the bracket anymore. In this way, we're kind of removing all the unnecessary stuff. So we're kind of neatening it up, and only using a general form instead of having that. So I much prefer this way, and much neater code. Look, you're not going to lose any points for it in the test, but it's just a way of making your code a bit better. Okay, so we're not returning any value. It's a constructor. We go through everything. Hopefully that's correct. Okay, we can use square. Yep. Okay, looks good. And hopefully my brackets are fine. Seem to be right. Okay. All right. Now, I might just leave it here, and I'll pick up another video for the next question, for the question 2. This way the video isn't too long. Okay, cheerio.